So this past Thursday, February 12th, the Senate Homeland Security Committee, chaired by Senator Rand Paul, held an oversight hearing on federal immigration enforcement in Minnesota, featuring Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, State Corrections Commissioner Paul Schnell, and Republican State Representative Harry Niska. The supposed purpose was a fact-finding mission to look into cooperation between federal agents and local law enforcement, but what actually happened was something far more revealing. Paul tried to build a case that Minneapolis's refusal to help federal immigration authorities justified sending in 3,000 federal agents, and his own witnesses kept accidentally proving him wrong. This is the guy who built his entire political career on opposing government overreach, who literally filibustered for 13 hours over a military drone policy what-if scenario, is now chairing a hearing to argue that local police departments should be forced to do the federal government's job for them. Let's watch this hearing, and again, I will give you my take at the end.
Thank you all for your testimony. I think there is a way we can get beyond, our differences on immigration and our differences on approach. And I think, but we have to look at this in a broad scope and try to leave some of that aside. I think there is no justification for bad behavior from law enforcement, whether it's your local police or others. It has to be investigated, it needs to be corrected. You have to change your policies. You have to announce that you're going to do a better job. But I think there is an explanation for why there's 3,000 ICE agents in Minnesota. One explanation has been put forward was vindictive. Maybe, I don't know for sure. But I do know that if you tell people preemptively that your local police will not cooperate, so if ICE calls you up and says to Minneapolis, we have a guy, we're just presuming it's a guy because more bad people out there, unfortunately, are men than women. It's a guy, this bad guy, we want to pick him up. He's been convicted of an assault and he now needs to be deported. If the policy of Minneapolis is not to cooperate at all, I mean, there's going to be a real problem, and then they're going to say we need more ICE agents. So what happens right now, Mr. Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, if I'm from ICE and I call Minneapolis and I say, John Smith is wanted and will you help us? Could we have 10 Minneapolis policemen go with 1 or 2 agents and arrest him? Or do we have to have 12 agents and no Minneapolis police? What happens?
Well, under Minnesota statute 631.50, anybody convicted of a felony who's in custody must be questioned about their nationality.
That's in custody. That's sort of a different question.
Okay.
I'm talking about somebody who's in the community and they need help arresting this person.
Right, but you said felony, so
you're right.
That's what maybe,
and that's a different. We'll talk about that. But let's talk about somebody they want help, and is the local police force going to give them help, or do they have to bring in all ICE agents to do it?
Certainly, targeted enforcement is not the problem, as has been said.
But I think that's what has been said of some of your policies, and the interpretation is that they don't have to and won't cooperate with ICE.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what my policy, first of all, they're not my policies. Just so all the members of the committee know, when you see advice or an advisory opinion coming from the Attorney General's office, this is not my opinion. It is the lawyers in my office at my best analysis of what the law requires. So I say that to you because even if I didn't issue an opinion, the law would still be what it was.
But a month ago, if ICE called the local Minneapolis police and said, we want to arrest this person, will the Minneapolis police help ICE to arrest a person?
I think so, yes.
Well, and now we're at a question of facts.
But see, Mr. Chairman,
think most people are arguing that that's not true and that that's a reason for the surge. If it is true, then the local officials need to say they will. But I mean, the mayor of Minneapolis said to, used crude language to tell them where to go. He didn't say, oh, we're not going to help you arrest 5-year-old boys because we think that's wrong, but if you have a rapist, we'll help you elect rapists, assault people, thieves, drug kingpins, et cetera. But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening to me. I mean, do you really think that it is happening? They're cooperating?
Yes, I do, Senator.
All right.
And let me just, if you'd allow me just to elaborate, I think that there is, what we're dealing with is a difference of what the scenario is. If you're talking about a person who's been convicted of a crime where you will, in targeted enforcement, you will see Minnesota officials make sure that that person is addressed properly, it deals with their consequences when it comes to immigration.
So Representative Niska, do you think the local police are cooperating if ICE calls them?
No, the public statements of Minneapolis officials have been that Minneapolis police will not assist in enforcing immigration. Perhaps they'll assist if there's some state crime that's alleged, but if ICE were to call in your scenario and say, we need to pick somebody up for violating immigration law, the Minneapolis public statements have been that they won't. And the example we saw just this last week of someone who was arrested with 50 pounds, an illegal immigrant arrested with 50 pounds of meth, and January 8th was allowed to go free and had to be taken by ICE last week.
Thank you. Mr. Schnell, I would like to know, and I've watched some of your interviews, so I am impressed with the idea that ICE was saying there was 1,300 people. You reviewed them. Some of these people aren't in Minnesota, never were in Minnesota. Some have been released to ICE themselves, and their list is just flat out wrong. The most impressive thing I heard in one of your interviews was that somebody named Lou Mua was a person that they were, saying, this is why we have to break down doors because this terrible person. Sounds like he probably is a terrible person, but you said he was in jail already, and he had a detainer. So I think that truth needs to be explored if that is really happening. There used to be, people said, a direct portal, though. So when you did it or somebody got booked, it went directly to ICE. Does that still exist, or do you have to do them one at a time in prison?
So, Mr. Chair, at present, we provide notification in accordance with law to ICE when they come in. There are systems that are available to people to be able to get that, for ICE to be able to get that information.
I was told that Mayorkas stopped the portal, and the portal was a very fast portal where it was sort of automatically done. True or not true?
It is true that there is a portal that ICE can access.
It was stopped under Mayorkas.
I believe so.
Okay, but you still do your job, you do your detainers in. And so one of the questions goes back to Attorney General Morris's point. So, and look, I'm a stickler for the law. I'm a libertarian on these issues. If detaining somebody who's already served their sentence doesn't make sense to me. But here's my question. If someone is in your prison for 5 years, which some of them are going to be in prison 5 years, they're also wanted and they're at a detainer, which means they haven't had their judgment. Why couldn't we go to immigration court during the 5 years in prison? Does that happen, and why doesn't it happen?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there are some rare instances where we have had people who have had immigration proceedings while they've been in custody and, where removal
That would answer
determinations
some of
were
the
made.
questions. Then you have a final court judgment. You go through a court, he's going to be represented, and we're going to go through the final judgment. And then Attorney General's problem that, they've not, a detainer's a request, not a conviction. Then they would have had their conviction. It's much easier. But they also, if it's seamlessly working, is it most of the time when you notify ICE, are they showing up on the day they're going to release and it's a peaceful turnover? Or are they doing it half the time, 20% of the time, 100% of the time? How's it working?
Mr. Chairman, I think there has been wide-scale cooperation for a long time. We have had, excellent experiences, and the local staff of the Department of Corrections and the local ICE office are very effective.
Right. Senator Peters.
Okay, so if you just watched that and felt a strange mix of frustration and whiplash, that's the correct response. Because what you just witnessed was a senator set up a carefully worded trick question. What happens if federal immigration authorities call Minneapolis and want help arresting a violent criminal? He got an answer he didn't expect from Attorney General Ellison. Then he switched over to a Republican state lawmaker who gave him the answer he wanted. And then he watched his own third witness. Corrections Commissioner Paul Schnell calmly testified that there has been wide-scale cooperation for a long time and that his department's relationship with the local federal immigration office has been very effective. That's the chairman's own witness panel shooting down his argument in real time. But here's what you probably didn't know while watching this. Federal immigration authorities' own numbers, reported by Fox 9 in January, show that only about 5.2% of the more than 2,000 people arrested during the Minnesota enforcement operation had records of violent crimes. 5% The Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank, Paul's own ideological home base, backed that up independently, finding that roughly 73% of federal immigration detainees this budget year had no criminal conviction at all. A CBS News investigation published last week found that across the whole country, less than 14% of those taken into federal immigration custody over the past year had violent criminal records, and nearly 40% had no criminal record at all. So when Senator Paul frames this as we just need help picking up a guy convicted of assault, he's describing about 1 out of every 20 arrests. Here's the other thing. Minneapolis' separation rule, the policy Paul keeps coming back to, isn't some rogue liberal invention. Poynter's reporting shows it was first passed in 2003 under the Bush administration, after Attorney General John Ashcroft pushed for local police to act as federal immigration enforcers. Minneapolis said no then, and cities across the country did the same. University of Minnesota law professor Linus Chan told Poynter that these kinds of policies are rooted in the 10th Amendment, which says the federal government can't force states to enforce federal law. The Supreme Court refused to strike down a similar California law during Trump's first term. This isn't a gray area. And here's where the irony gets almost unbearable. The man who in 2014 wrote a piece in Time magazine warning about the militarization of law enforcement and the erosion of civil liberties in due process that allows police to become judge and jury is now chairing a hearing where the unspoken argument is that sending 3,000 heavily armed federal agents into a city of 400,000 people was a fair and justified response to local police departments using their legal right not to enforce federal immigration law. This is the same operation where a federal judge found at least 96 times that ICE broke court orders in Minnesota in a single month. The same operation during which Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3, and Alex Pretty, a 37-year-old ICU nurse at the VA, both lost their lives. The same operation that, based on a Minneapolis city damage report, caused at least $203 million in economic harm. The same operation that Tom Homan announced was ending during the hearing itself, a fact the senators didn't even find out about for roughly an hour. So what's actually happening here? The game plan is simple. Change the subject. If you can make the conversation about whether Minneapolis police are helpful enough, you don't have to talk about whether flooding an American city with federal agents, an operation that cost 2 citizens their lives, was justified. You don't have to talk about the 95% of people arrested who weren't violent criminals. You don't have to explain why the White House claimed it arrested 10,000 criminal illegal aliens in Minneapolis when DHS wouldn't give names to back it up. You get to put Keith Ellison on defense instead of explaining why your own federal agents were using force against everyday people, including a nurse, on camera. When someone asks you to explain why 2 Americans lost their lives and you respond with, well, the real question is why won't the local cops answer the phone? That's not oversight. That's a distraction. Here's the bottom line. The Minnesota enforcement operation arrested 4,000 people. By the administration's own numbers, the overwhelming majority had no violent criminal history. 2 American citizens lost their lives. A federal judge found nearly 100 broken court orders in 1 month. And the Senate hearing called to look into all of this spent most of its first panel asking why a city with 600 police officers didn't volunteer them to help the federal government do the federal government's job. So what does this actually mean for you? It means the basic principle that your local police department gets to decide its own priorities. That your city council and your mayor set the rules for the officers your tax dollars pay for is being reframed as getting in the way. If you live in any city with a separation rule, and there are hundreds of them, the argument being tested in this hearing is that your refusal to volunteer your local cops to do federal enforcement work is reason enough for the federal government to send thousands of agents into your community. It's like your landlord forcing entry into your home because you didn't water his plants in the hallway. NBC News polling shows Trump's approval rating on immigration has taken a major hit since the Minneapolis events. Strong disapproval jumped to 49%, up from 34% last April. The administration isn't just losing the policy argument, it's losing the public. And yet, here's the bigger picture problem that should worry you most. A federal judge already found 96 broken court orders in 1 month. If that doesn't lead to real consequences, the playbook is set. Any administration of any party can flood a city it doesn't like with federal agents, and when things go wrong, hold a hearing blaming the city for not being helpful enough. And for what? What was the actual purpose of the Minnesota enforcement operation? The official reason was removing the worst of the worst, dangerous criminals, but 5% of those arrested had violent records. The real reason things blew up was Trump's attacks on Minnesota's Somali community, whom he described using dehumanizing language. The operation launched weeks after right-wing influencers posted fraud claims targeting Somali-run daycares. Tom Homan, who oversaw the wind-down, is a longtime government official who served under Obama and positioned this as a political win either way. Either you cooperate and he takes credit, or you resist and he uses your pushback as a talking point. And Paul once said, we need a new kind of Republican who cares about minorities and civil liberties, handed him the hearing to do it in. The same Rand Paul who, I should note, wanted to end mandatory minimum sentences for drug possession because, quote, our prisons are bursting with young men of color. Apparently, federal overreach is only a problem when it's not an election year talking point. Syracuse University law professor Jenny Breen, in a piece reported by PolitiFact, explained that sanctuary city policies protect the right of states and cities to say no to doing federal work, and the federal government is free to enforce its own laws but can't draft local police departments to do it for them. That's the key legal line that this entire hearing tried to blur. That's not a liberal position or a conservative position, that's the 10th Amendment, which, last I checked, was still in the Constitution, though admittedly I haven't refreshed the page in a few hours. So here's where things stand. The Minnesota enforcement operation is officially ending. 2 American citizens lost their lives. 4,000 people were arrested, the vast majority of whom were not violent criminals. At least $203 million in economic damage was done to Minneapolis. A federal judge found roughly 100 broken court orders, and the Senate hearing called to look into this spent its time asking whether local police are being helpful enough. This isn't about immigration enforcement. If it were, the conversation would be about why 95% of the people arrested weren't the violent criminals the administration promised to go after. This is about whether the federal government can punish a city for standing on its legal rights, and whether a self-described libertarian will give them cover to do it. The darker reality is this: Rand Paul knows better. He's smart enough to know that the 10th Amendment protects local self-rule. He once filibustered for 13 hours over the possibility that a military drone program could target an American citizen. 2 American citizens lost their lives at the hands of federal agents in Minneapolis, and his response was to hold a hearing asking why the city didn't help more. I guess Liberty has a zip code now, and apparently an immigration status requirement, which, for a libertarian, is a fascinating addition to the Bill of Rights. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read them and want to know what you think. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and thanks so much for watching.